In today's video, we're going to be talking about different tank mate options for the Apistogramma. The Apisto is an awesome dwarf South American cichlid with a lot of different color variations and species to choose from. It's an awesome fish that you don't need a huge tank for, but it can be tricky sometimes finding the best tank mates for them. So in today's video, we're going to walk through that list. Let's dive right in. The Apistogramma is a Sorry, got Chester here. So as mentioned, the Apistogramma is a South American cichlid. It is a dwarf cichlid, so it stays small and it doesn't require a massive tank. If you're going to be keeping a pair of Apistos or just a solo Apisto, I think a 20-gallon tank is sufficient, and you could add some tank mates in that setup. There are more options that you could add with the Apisto if you get slightly larger tanks, and we're going to talk about that today. But one of the main considerations when choosing a tank mate for the Apisto is making sure that they are relatively peaceful, that they're not going to bully the Apistogramma, that they're not going to be fin nipping, which is a big thing since the Apisto, especially the males, get some awesome dorsal fins that are really spiked up. So even for some of your Tetras or Barbs that might be fin nippers, and especially some of your mid or large cichlids, those are definitely things we want to leave off of the list of tank mate options. But with all that being said, there are still some great tank mate options for the Apisto that can really complement them, not only with their color, but also with the behavior and just adding a different dynamic to your tank. So to start us off with number 10 on the list is the Dwarf Flag Cichlid. We always love keeping different cichlids together, so you're going to see a few on this list that you might not see on other videos or other information out there. The Dwarf Flag Cichlid is another very peaceful South American cichlids who share the same water parameters. They're both peaceful, and the Dwarf Flag stays pretty small as well. I think you could add a few of these alongside a pair of Apistos and maybe a schooling fish to something like a 30 or a 40-gallon tank, and it would be a really good setup. They have a slightly different body shape with some really cool fins, a very laid-back and peaceful nature, some different colors than some of your other Apistos, and they share the water parameters being South American fish, so it makes for a really great choice if you're looking to pair the Apisto with different cichlids. And that leads us to number 9 on the list, which is yet another cichlid, and that is the Keyhole cichlid. The Keyhole is another South American cichlid that stays pretty peaceful and pretty small. The Keyhole will get a little bit larger, topping out around 5 inches in length, but because they're so peaceful and they do well in the same type of environments such as live plants, driftwood, rocks, and sand, it makes for a really good combination with the Apisto. In fact, the Keyhole, the Dwarf Flag Cichlid, and the Apisto would all be really good tank mate options if you wanted to go with a cichlid heavy tank. The Keyhole is a pretty underrated cichlid in my opinion because it stays so peaceful. It would be another great option if you have a tank from that 30 to 55 gallon range and you're looking to pair the Apisto with a few different cichlids. Okay, so I promised the full list is not just cichlids. We're going to get into some of the other peaceful schooling fish that you could add to the tank with the Apisto, starting with the Denizen Barb. I have 7 Denizen Barbs in my 150-gallon aquarium with my Apisto, and they make for a really good schooling fish. The only reason they're kind of low on the list is just because they do get a little bit larger, and you probably need a 75-gallon tank or larger when keeping a school of Denizen Barbs. With that being said, if you do have a 75-gallon tank, you could add a school of Denizen Barbs along with some of your dwarf cichlids, maybe the Keyhole, Dwarf Flag, Apisto, etc. You could add those alongside the Denizen Barb, and it would make for a really cool tank setup with some peaceful fish with a lot of room to swim. We did a full care guide on the Denizen Barb recently, and I'll leave that in the description below. But they are awesome schooling fish with a very peaceful demeanor. For a barb, they are definitely not fin nippers. They will mind their own business, swimming around your tank constantly, providing a ton of activity. They also have some awesome color with a black and red stripe down their body, yellow and black stripes in their fins, a little bit of red in their dorsal fin, and a silver body throughout. Okay, so now for a schooling fish that doesn't require a massive tank, and that is the Harley Rasboras. I had Harley Rasboras a few years back, and I actually moved them over to Quinn's classroom aquarium since they fit better with his setups. But Harley Rasboras stay pretty small, and they get some pinkish red color with some dark blue and black in its body. They provide that extra dynamic to your tank, being that schooling type of fish, and they swim out and about, especially in the mid and upper levels of your aquarium. Since the Apistos will usually stay in the bottom third of the tank, the Harley and Rasboras will be in the mid and upper levels, which can really fill out the tank and make for a great setup. And even if you get a group of 6 or more of these, you really don't need a large tank to be able to keep them. Even in something like a 29 gallon, for instance, it would be awesome to have a group of these, some Apistos, and maybe even another bottom dweller to that tank to really fill it out. And even though they're not South American fish, they can adapt to most water parameters, so they should have no issues going with the Apisto, and I think it could make for a really good tank mate. And speaking of more of a bottom dwelling fish, I think the Autosynclist is a great option when it comes to Apistogramma tank mates. The Autosynclist stays really small, but you can get a group of them and they can be very comfortable in a group, and they do really well at eating some of the algae and leftover debris in your tank. They basically look like a small version of the Pleco, and because they stay small, you don't need a massive tank for them. You could easily fit them in a 20 gallon tank, like a 20 long. If you have a couple of Pistos, you could definitely get some Autosynclists in there. They'll help you with some of the algae control in your tank, especially if you have live plants. If you add Autosynclists in there, they'll have that space to hide, and they'll also control the algae so that those plants can thrive. And because they are very small and very peaceful, they definitely won't harm the Apistogramma at all. And I think it's definitely a great option when keeping them with the Apistogramma. But if you're looking for a bottom dwelling fish that has a little bit more size and a great schooling behavior, I think any of the Corydoras could make for a really good option. Anything as small as the Panda Cory to some of your slightly larger Corydoras make for a really good option when it comes to the Apistogramma. Even though the Apisto stays in the bottom third of the tank, and the Corydoras will as well, it shouldn't be too much of an issue as long as you have enough floor space and territory for the Apistos. I think a 20 gallon long aquarium or anything larger than that would make for a really good habitat when it comes to the Corydoras paired with the Apistogramma. Corydoras have a lot of activity for one of the bottom dwelling scavenging fish. They do really well in a group, so you could get 6 or more of these and they'd be very comfortable together. I really love the combination of having something like the Corydoras at the bottom, something like a dwarf cichlid like your Apistogramma in the bottom third, and something that's schooling in the upper levels, something like the Harley and Rasboras that we just talked about, or even the Denizen Barb, which could make for a really great dynamic throughout the tank. It's another fish that does best with sand, driftwood, rocks, and different hiding spots, so again, the tank setup for your Apisto really mimics the ideal tank setup for the Corydoras as well. It's a really good tank option, and that's why they're coming in at number 5. Number 4 on the list is the rainbow fish. Rainbow fish are another very active swimmer throughout the tank. They could be a great dither fish for your Apisto, and they have some great coloration, as you would guess based on their name. They're really adaptable to different water parameters, so that shouldn't be an issue when it comes to keeping with your Apisto. I think it makes for a really great tank option, especially if you have something smaller than a 75 gallon tank and you're looking for that schooling behavior. Number 3 on the list is the Bristlenose Pleco. I'm keeping this specific to the Bristlenose Pleco because some of your other larger Plecos might need a bigger tank, or they might just be a little too boisterous for the Apistogramma, but there are a lot of smaller exotic Plecos that could work well. But in general, the Bristlenose Pleco is great because it stays to themselves. It's a really peaceful fish. It stays pretty small, less than 5 inches usually when full grown. They are scavenging fish that might stay in the bottom third of the tank, but they won't really bother the Apisto, so you don't have to worry there. There are a few different types of Bristlenose Plecos that you could choose from, something like the chocolate or the super red like I have here in my 150 gallon tank, keeping it looking pristine, spotless, and clear of any algae. It's a really cool fish with different color variations to choose from, and just a different behavior and dynamic to add to your tank alongside the Pisto. So we couldn't go any further without adding another cichlid to this list, and this time it's the angelfish. Sometimes people don't even realize that the angelfish is a South American cichlid, but it can be a great tank mate option for the Apisto because they swim in the mid to upper levels of the tank more often than the Apisto, and they are South American cichlids, so they share water parameters, tank setup requirements, and diet. And overall, the angelfish stays pretty peaceful when it comes to different cichlids. Sometimes if the angelfish are breeding or if they're in a tank that's just too small, that's when the angel can be a little more aggressive than the Apisto, but generally they'll keep to themselves, especially since they're pretty different in overall shape and color patterns. For the tank setup, I would recommend sand, driftwood, rocks, and live plants. Apistos and angelfish are some of the best cichlids when it comes to a planted aquarium, and that's just another reason why they make for an awesome pair. And of course, angelfish are high on this list because we are the cichlid bros, and we always like to keep cichlids together when it's an option. But even though we love keeping cichlids together when we can, the number one fish on this tank is not a cichlid, it is the neon tetra. I actually grouped the neon and cardinal tetra together, but in general both would work really well with the Apisto. Of course, the neon tetra has bright blue and red, the cardinal has a little more red in its body, but both species make for a really good shoaling and schooling behavior for your tank. They're very peaceful, so they definitely won't fin nip or harass the Apisto in any way. They'll really stay to themselves, and it's more so the Apisto that could do some harm to the Tetras if the tank is too small and the Apistos are in breeding mode. But if you have that minimum tank size for the Apisto that I recommend, which is that 20-gallon tank, maybe it's the 20 high or the 20 long, I think you could get up to 6 to 10 neon tetras to pair with maybe an Apisto or two. And with all that, you have a lot going on in your tank, even for a smaller nano-sized tank. You have different species, different colors, different behaviors going on in your tank, and could really complement that centerpiece fish being the Apistogramma. And then lastly, for some honorable mentions, the Apisto could be kept with some more peaceful mid-sized South American cichlids if it's done right. I didn't put them on the list because they're a little more boisterous, sometimes could be aggressive, but something more peaceful like the Geophagus finni or the Albino hecali, that's really worked for me in a bigger tank. And then something on the smaller end like the Crobensis could be another option if you wanted to go with cichlids, but sometimes they can be a little more feisty than some of the other fish we talked about on the list, so we left them off today. And then lastly, I did leave off a few tetra species just because they can be a little fin nippy, including the bleeding heart tetra, the Buenos Aires tetra, and the Colombian tetra. Those could all possibly work with the Apisto, but some have been known to be fin nippers, so I left them off the list. But that does it for our top 10 list and our honorable mentions. I hope you enjoyed that video or found that information helpful. I also did a full care guide and species profile on the Apistogramma, so if you'd like to see more just general care information, check that video down in the description below. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.